Infertile millionaire denies having impregnated his wife until he arrives at the emergency room and sees the baby. Ethan Parker sat in his corner office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. The Wall Street skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, a view he'd worked 15 years to earn. His fingers moved methodically across his laptop keyboard, reviewing the latest acquisition reports while his mind wandered to the dinner meeting he had scheduled for that evening. The subtle vibration of his phone broke his concentration. Lila's name flashed across the screen, and he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Their morning conversation had been strained, like so many others lately. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but thought better of it. "Hey," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Ethan!" Lila's voice came through breathless, with an edge he couldn't quite place. "Are you busy? I need to tell you something." He glanced at the stack of documents waiting for his review. "I'm in the middle of something. Can it wait until tonight?" "No, it can't." There was something different in her tone, excitement mixed with nervousness. "I just got back from Dr. Mitchell's office." Ethan's hand stilled over his keyboard. Dr. Mitchell had been their fertility specialist for the past 3 years, though they'd stopped treatment 6 months ago after the last failure. The memories of those disappointed hopes still stung. "Why were you at Dr. Mitchell's?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "We agreed we were done with all that." I know we did, but..." She paused, and he could hear her taking a deep breath. "Ethan, I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a physical force. He sat back in his leather chair, his free hand gripping the armrest. The busy city beyond his window seemed to freeze, all sound fading away, except for his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. "That's not possible," he finally managed, his throat dry. "The doctors said..." "I know what they said," Lila interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I took 3 tests this morning, and Dr. Mitchell just confirmed it. We're having a baby." Ethan's mind raced through calculations and probabilities. They'd tried for years with no success. The best specialists in New York had told them their chances were practically non-existent. He'd watched Lila cry herself to sleep too many times to count, had held her through the disappointments, until finally they'd both agreed to stop putting themselves through the pain. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No mistake," Lila replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice, the pure joy that he couldn't seem to share. "I'm 6 weeks along. The baby is healthy. Dr. Mitchell did an ultrasound and everything." Ethan stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Below, people moved along the streets like tiny ants, going about their normal lives while his world tilted on its axis. His reflection stared back at him, pale and shocked. "I don't understand," he said, more to himself than to Lila. "We stopped treatments. We agreed." "I know you have questions," Lila said softly. "I have so much to tell you. Can you come home early? We should talk about this in person." But Ethan barely heard her. His mind was spinning with possibilities, none of them making sense. The statistics, the medical reports, the years of failure, they all pointed to one impossible conclusion. He sank back into his chair, feeling as though the air had been sucked from the room. "Ethan?" Lila's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," he replied automatically, though he felt disconnected from his own voice. His eyes fell on the family photo on his desk, him and Lila on their wedding day, both smiling, full of hopes and dreams that had slowly crumbled under the weight of reality. Now those dreams were supposedly coming true, but instead of joy, he felt only confusion and disbelief. "I need to go," he said, his voice hollow. "I have a meeting." "Ethan, please," Lila began, but he had already ended the call. He sat in the growing darkness of his office, staring at nothing, as Lila's words echoed in his mind. Pregnant. After all this time, after all the failures and heartbreak, after they'd finally accepted their fate, pregnant. The word felt foreign, impossible, like a language he couldn't understand. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse apartment. Lila paced the polished hardwood floors, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her cream silk blouse. She'd changed 3 times before Ethan came home, wanting everything to be perfect for this moment. The sound of keys in the door made her heart skip. Ethan walked in, his suit jacket draped over his arm, looking more disheveled than usual. His normally pristine tie hung loose around his neck. "You're home early," she said, trying to contain her excitement. She'd imagined this moment countless times over the years, sharing the joy of pregnancy with her husband. But the reality felt different, heavier somehow. Ethan set his briefcase down slowly, deliberately, as if buying time. "I thought we should talk." "Yes." Lila moved toward him, her face glowing. "I still can't believe it myself. After all this time, Ethan, it's really happening." She reached for his hand, but he shifted away, moving to pour himself a glass of water from the crystal decanter on their bar cart. "Let's sit down," he said, his voice carefully controlled. The same voice he used in board meetings when discussing difficult topics. Lila's smile faltered slightly, but she followed him to their modern leather sectional. The city lights twinkled beyond their windows, a beautiful backdrop to what should have been a celebration. "Dr. Mitchell ran all the tests," she began, pulling out the ultrasound picture from her pocket. "Look, you can already see." "Lila," Ethan interrupted, setting his glass down on the coffee table without taking the picture. "We need to think about this logically." The joy in her chest began to deflate. "What do you mean?" "We've been through every treatment available. Multiple specialists told us it wasn't possible." He loosened his tie further, a sign of his discomfort. "The statistics— Sometimes miracles happen," Lila interjected, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Dr. Mitchell said—" "Dr. Mitchell isn't infallible." Ethan stood up, running a hand through his dark hair. "We need to be realistic here. After everything we've been through, all the disappointments—" He trailed off, staring out at the city below. Lila watched him, the excitement of the day crumbling under his skepticism. "I took 3 home tests before going to the doctor. The ultrasound showed—" "Tests can be wrong," he said flatly. "False positives happen, and early ultrasounds aren't always reliable." "Why are you doing this?" Lila's voice cracked slightly. "Why can't you just be happy?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Because I've watched you break down month after month, year after year. I've held you through failed treatments and crushed hopes. We finally accepted our reality, Lila. We moved on. But this changes everything." She stood up, moving toward him with the ultrasound picture extended. "Look at it, Ethan. Really look." He glanced at the grainy image but quickly looked away. "We need more tests," he said quietly. "Different doctors. Second opinions." "You don't believe me," Lila whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "It's not about believing you." Ethan's voice was measured, rational, the voice he used when explaining complex business deals. "It's about being practical, scientific. We know our medical history." Lila clutched the ultrasound picture to her chest, feeling the joy of her miracle morning turning cold under his logical dissection. The evening light had faded, leaving their elegant living room in shadows that seemed fitting for the moment. "I'm going to schedule appointments with other specialists," Ethan continued, already pulling out his phone. "We need to verify everything before we—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before we get our hopes up again." The space between them felt vast, filled with unspoken words and fears. Lila watched her husband, the man who had held her through years of disappointment, now standing distant and skeptical in the face of what should have been their greatest joy. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen's bay windows, casting a warm glow across the marble countertops. Lila moved with practiced ease through their gourmet kitchen, the gentle clinking of plates and silverware filling the otherwise quiet space. She'd woken up early, determined to make Ethan's favorite breakfast, Belgian waffles with fresh berries and whipped cream. The coffee maker hummed, filling the air with rich aromatics. Lila hummed softly to herself as she whisked the waffle batter, stealing occasional glances at Ethan. He sat at their breakfast nook, still in his navy silk robe, staring unseeing at his tablet while his coffee grew cold. "The waffles will be ready in a minute," Lila said, trying to draw him out of his thoughts. She'd noticed how distant he'd been since yesterday's news, how he'd barely slept, tossing and turning beside her all night. Ethan looked up, blinking as if emerging from deep water. "Oh, thanks." Lila poured batter into the waffle iron, watching steam rise from its edges. The kitchen felt heavy with unspoken words, the usual morning comfort replaced by an underlying tension. She arranged fresh strawberries and blueberries on a plate, creating a colorful display that felt at odds with the mood. "I thought maybe we could talk about names," she ventured, keeping her voice light. "I've always loved—" "It's too early for that," Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. He set down his tablet with more force than necessary. "We don't even know if what?" Lila turned to face him, spatula in hand. "If it's real? If the multiple tests and ultrasound were all somehow wrong?" Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled dark hair, frustration evident in every movement. "You know our history, Lila. The doctors all said—" "I know what they said." The waffle iron beeped, and Lila turned to remove the perfectly golden waffle. "But things change. Medicine advances. Miracles happen." She placed the waffle in front of him, garnishing it with berries and a dollop of fresh whipped cream. Ethan stared at the plate as if it were a complex business proposal requiring careful analysis. "There's something I need to tell you," Lila said quietly, her hands gripping the edge of the counter for support. The morning light suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. Ethan looked up, his gray eyes sharp with sudden attention. "What is it?" Lila took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. 6 months ago, I heard about an experimental fertility treatment, a new protocol that showed promising results in cases like ours. The silence in the kitchen grew thick. Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something darker. I went through with the treatment," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Without telling you." "You what?" Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. "I knew you wouldn't approve. After our last failed attempt, you were so adamant about stopping, about accepting things as they were." The words tumbled out faster now. "But I couldn't give up, Ethan. I couldn't let go of our dream." Ethan stood slowly, his breakfast untouched. "You went behind my back? Made this decision without me?" "I was afraid," Lila admitted, tears pricking at her eyes. "Afraid you'd never be ready to try again. Afraid of watching you shut down every time I mentioned children. I couldn't bear to see that look in your eyes again." "So you lied to me instead?" His voice rose slightly, controlled anger evident in every word. "Made medical decisions that affected both of us without my knowledge or consent?" "I did it for us." Lila reached for him, but he stepped back. "For our family." "Family." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family is built on trust, Lila, on honesty." He pushed away from the breakfast nook, his chair scraping against the floor. "You betrayed that trust." "Ethan, please!" But he was already walking away, his shoulders rigid with anger. The sound of his footsteps echoed through their apartment, followed by the sharp slam of his study door. Lila stood alone in the sunny kitchen, the cheerful breakfast spread now seeming like a mockery of her hopes for this morning. The waffle on Ethan's plate grew cold, the whipped cream slowly melting into a puddle of white. Ethan's measured steps echoed across the marble floors of their living room. Back and forth he went, like a caged animal, his reflection fractured in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city below. The morning sun cast long shadows, making the space feel smaller than its generous dimensions. "You have to understand," Lila said from her position on their Italian leather sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "After the last failed attempt, understand what exactly?" Ethan spun to face her, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That you deliberately kept this from me? That you made a unilateral decision about our future?" "I made a decision about my body," Lila countered, though her voice trembled slightly. "A decision to give us hope." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, messing up the careful styling he'd done earlier. "Hope? You call secretly undergoing experimental medical procedures hope?" He stopped pacing, bracing himself against the marble mantel of their fireplace. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that could have been?" "The doctors thoroughly explained the risks," Lila said, standing up slowly. "I researched everything, spoke with other patients. Without telling me!" Ethan's palm slammed against the mantel, making Lila jump. "I'm your husband. Lila, we're supposed to be partners." "Partners?" Lila's voice grew stronger. "You checked out of this partnership the moment the last treatment failed. You buried yourself in work, refused to discuss alternatives. Because I couldn't watch you go through that pain again." The words burst from him, raw and unexpected. "Do you have any idea what it was like, watching you cry yourself to sleep month after month? Seeing the hope die in your eyes every time we got bad news?" Lila took a step toward him, but he held up a hand, stopping her. "I needed time," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "Time to process, to heal. Instead, you went behind my back." "Time?" Lila's laugh was bitter. "I'm 36, Ethan. Time isn't exactly on our side here. That doesn't justify the lies." Ethan resumed his pacing, his expensive loafers clicking against the floor. "What else haven't you told me? What other secrets are you keeping?" "Nothing." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I did this because I love you, because I want us to have a family." "Love doesn't manipulate," Ethan cut in. "Love doesn't deceive." "And love doesn't abandon," Lila shot back. "You abandoned our dream of having children. You abandoned me in my grief." The accusation hung heavy in the air between them. Ethan stared at her, his gray eyes stormy with emotion. The ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "I need some air," he finally said, his voice rough. He strode to the entryway, grabbing his keys from the silver bowl on the console table. "Ethan, please." Lila followed him, her bare feet silent on the cool marble. "Don't leave like this. We need to talk about this." "I can't talk right now," he said, not turning around as he shrugged on his jacket. "I can't even think straight." "Where are you going?" "I don't know." His hand closed around the door handle. I need space." The heavy door opened and closed with a decisive click, leaving Lila alone in the vast entryway. She moved to the window, watching as Ethan emerged onto the street below. He paused for a moment, looking lost, before heading toward his parked car. Lila pressed her forehead against the cool glass, one hand unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach. Through the window, She watched as Ethan's Tesla pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the morning traffic, taking with it any certainty about their future. The Tesla hummed quietly as Ethan navigated through the city's morning traffic. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tight enough to ache. The familiar buildings of downtown blurred past as his mind raced, replaying Lila's confession over and over. An experimental treatment behind his back. The words felt like acid in his throat. He pulled into a small park overlooking the bay, killing the engine. The autumn sun glinted off the water, but he barely noticed its beauty. Instead, his mind wandered to the countless nights they'd spent in fertility clinics, the way Lila's hope would crumble with each negative test. "Damn it," he muttered, pressing his forehead against the steering wheel. Had he really been so absorbed in his work that he'd missed the signs? The subtle changes in Lila's behavior, the way she'd seemed more distant lately? A jogger passed by his car, and Ethan straightened, suddenly aware of how long he'd been sitting there. The dashboard clock showed it was nearly noon. He'd been driving aimlessly for hours. His phone buzzed. Another message from Lila. He'd ignored the previous ones, but guilt gnawed at him now. Opening his phone, he scrolled through them. "Please come home. We need to talk about this. I'm sorry I kept it from you." The last one made his chest tighten. "I was afraid of losing you." Ethan closed his eyes, remembering the look on Lila's face when their last round of traditional fertility treatments had failed. How she'd tried to hide her devastation, forcing a smile and saying they could try again. But he'd seen the light dim in her eyes, watched as she withdrew into herself. And what had he done? Thrown himself into work, avoiding the pain by avoiding her? Maybe that's why she hadn't told him about the experimental treatment. He'd made himself unavailable, unreachable in his own grief and fear. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip when Ethan finally steered the Tesla back toward their neighborhood. His anger had cooled, replaced by a heavy mixture of guilt and uncertainty. The pregnancy still felt impossible, like a dream he couldn't quite believe in. But his reaction, walking out, leaving Lila alone, that shame was very real. Their townhouse came into view, its elegant facade bathed in golden light. Ethan parked in their usual spot, but remained in the car for several long moments, gathering his courage. Finally, he made his way up the front steps and unlocked the door. The house was quiet, but a soft lamp glow spilled from the living room. Ethan found Lila there, curled up in her favorite reading chair, a throw blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "I shouldn't have walked out like that." Lila's fingers twisted in the blanket's fringe. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. "I know I should have told you about the treatment." Ethan crossed the room slowly, sinking onto the ottoman in front of her chair. "I haven't been present," he admitted. "Not really. Not for a long time." "I was so afraid," Lila's voice cracked. "Afraid it wouldn't work, afraid it would, afraid of hoping again." "I know." Ethan reached for her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. "I want to do better. To be better." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I can't promise I won't have doubts, but I promise to be here, to support you through this pregnancy." Lila's other hand drifted to her stomach, a gesture that still made Ethan's heart clench with uncertainty. But he forced himself to focus on her face, on the tentative hope he saw there. "That's all I want," she said softly. "For us to face this together." Ethan nodded, though the doubts still churned beneath his surface calm. The road ahead felt uncertain, filled with questions he wasn't sure he was ready to face. But for now, In this moment, he could be what Lila needed him to be. Present, supportive, trying. The evening had settled into an uneasy quiet. Ethan and Lila sat on opposite ends of their plush sectional sofa, the space between them filled with unspoken words. The TV murmured in the background, neither of them really watching the cooking show that played across the screen. Ethan glanced at his wife, noting how she absently rubbed her stomach. Despite their earlier reconciliation, tension still hung in the air like a heavy curtain. He wanted to reach across the divide, to offer some comfort, but uncertainty held him back. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, breaking the silence. Lila turned to answer, but suddenly her face twisted in pain. She doubled over, clutching her abdomen, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. "Lila?" Ethan was at her side in an instant, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder. "What's wrong?" "I don't—" She sucked in a breath through clenched teeth. "Something's not right." Her fingers dug into the sofa cushions, knuckles white with tension. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Should I call an ambulance?" Another wave of pain hit, and Lila curled further into herself. "Yes," she managed to whisper. "Please." With trembling fingers, Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice felt like a lifeline as he described the situation, watching helplessly as Lila rocked back and forth, her face pale and drawn. "They're on their way," he said, ending the call. "Just breathe, okay? Try to breathe." Lila nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's too early," she gasped. "The baby, it's too early." The word sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Despite his lingering doubts about the pregnancy, fear for both Lila and the child gripped him. He grabbed her hand, and she squeezed it hard enough to make him wince. "Everything's going to be fine," he said, though uncertainty made his voice shake. "Just hold on." Minutes crawled by like hours. Lila's breathing grew more labored, and Ethan found himself counting the seconds between her pained gasps. When the doorbell finally rang, he nearly jumped out of his skin. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, asking questions and checking Lila's vital signs. Ethan answered what he could, feeling increasingly helpless as medical terms flew over his head. "We need to get her to the hospital," one of the paramedics said. "She's showing signs of premature labor." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He watched as they helped Lila onto the stretcher, her face contorted with another wave of pain. "I'll follow in the car," he said, but Lila's grip on his hand tightened. "No," she pleaded. "Stay with me. Please." The fear in her voice broke through his hesitation. He nodded, climbing into the ambulance beside her. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle lurched into motion, sirens wailing. Inside the cramped space, Ethan held Lila's hand as she breathed through the contractions. The paramedic monitored her vital signs, speaking in low, reassuring tones. "Almost there," Ethan murmured, though the journey seemed endless. Streetlights flashed by the windows, casting alternating shadows across Lila's strained face. When they finally reached the emergency room, everything became a blur of motion and urgent voices. Doctors and nurses swarmed around them as Lila was wheeled through automatic doors. "Mrs. Parker," a doctor in blue scrubs addressed them, keeping pace with the stretcher. "I'm Dr. Chen. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're showing signs of premature labor. We need to act quickly." Lila's grip on Ethan's hand tightened again as another contraction hit. Her breath came in quick, sharp bursts. "But it's too early," Ethan protested, his voice cracking. "She's only in her second trimester." Dr. Chen's expression was grave. "That's why this is an emergency. We need to get her stabilized immediately." They pushed through another set of doors, the hospital corridors seeming to stretch endlessly ahead of them. Lila's face was white with pain and fear, her eyes locked on Ethan's as she fought to control her breathing. The medical team worked around them, calling out numbers and medical terms that made no sense to Ethan. All he could focus on was Lila's hand in his, and the terrifying reality that both she and their unborn child were in danger. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows in the sterile hospital hallway as Ethan paced back and forth. His expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished floor with each turn, the sound echoing off the bare walls. He loosened his tie, feeling suffocated despite the open space. A nurse hurried past, and Ethan stopped, hoping for news, but she continued without a glance in his direction. His phone weighed heavy in his pocket, dozens of unread messages from the office piling up. None of that mattered now. He ran his fingers through his hair, disheveling it further. The events of the past few hours felt surreal. One moment they were sitting on their couch, and the next, Lila was being rushed through emergency doors, her face contorted in pain. The waiting area chairs remained empty behind him. He couldn't bring himself to sit, couldn't be still when everything inside him was churning with anxiety. The smell of antiseptic burned his nostrils, making him wish he could open a window, breathe fresh air, clear his head. A young couple walked past, the woman heavily pregnant, both of them shooting sympathetic glances his way. Ethan turned away, unable to bear their pitying looks. His mind kept replaying Lila's words from earlier, about the experimental treatment she'd undergone without telling him. The betrayal still stung, but now it was tangled with fear. What exactly had this treatment involved? Why hadn't she trusted him enough to discuss it? He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to push away the image of Lila's pale face as they wheeled her away. An orderly pushed an empty wheelchair past him, its wheels squeaking slightly. Ethan checked his watch for the 100th time. How long had it been? An hour? 2? Time seemed to stretch endlessly in this fluorescent-lit limbo. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Dr. Chen walking toward him, her face serious but not grim. She held a tablet in her hands, her blue scrubs still pristine despite the urgency of the situation. "Mr. Parker," she said, gesturing to the waiting area chairs. "Please, let's sit down." Ethan's heart jumped into his throat, but he followed her lead, perching on the edge of the uncomfortable plastic chair. "How is she? How's the baby?" Dr. Chen tapped her tablet screen, bringing up what looked like medical charts. "Your wife is stable for now, but she's not out of danger. We've managed to slow the contractions, but her blood pressure remains concerning." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But she'll be okay?" "We're hopeful, Doctor," Chen said carefully. "However, I need to discuss something important with you." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "Mrs. Parker informed us about the experimental fertility treatment she underwent. We've reviewed the documentation she provided." The tension in Ethan's shoulders increased. "What about it?" "The treatment was quite aggressive," Dr. Chen explained, her tone measured. "While innovative, it hasn't undergone the usual rigorous testing procedures. From what we can see, the hormonal changes it induced might have contributed to this early labor situation." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Are you saying the treatment put her in danger?" "Experimental procedures always carry risks," Dr. Chen said carefully. "The combination of hormones used was particularly intense. It appears to have successfully achieved pregnancy, but it may have also created complications we're now dealing with." The information hit Ethan like a physical blow. He remembered his anger at Lila's confession, how betrayed he'd felt. Now that anger transformed into something else: fear, guilt, concern. She'd wanted this so badly she'd risked her own health. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice rough. "We'll continue monitoring her closely," Dr. Chen replied. "The next 24 hours are crucial, but there's definitely hope, both for Lila and the baby." The delivery room hummed with urgent activity. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring both Lila and the baby's vital signs. Ethan stood beside the hospital bed, his hand enveloped around Lila's smaller one, feeling her grip tighten with each contraction. Her face was flushed, hair dampened with sweat against her forehead, but her eyes held a fierce determination that made his chest tighten. "You're doing great, Mrs. Parker," the nurse encouraged, adjusting one of the monitors. "Just remember your breathing." Lila nodded, her breath coming in controlled pants. She turned to look at Ethan, her eyes glazed with exhaustion and fear. "Don't let go," she whispered. "I'm right here," he assured her, though his own heart raced with uncertainty. The sterile smell of the room made his head swim, and the constant beeping of machines created a surreal backdrop to this life-changing moment. Another contraction hit, and Lila's back arched. She squeezed Ethan's hand so hard he felt his fingers go numb, but he didn't pull away. Her pain was his anchor, keeping him present when everything inside him wanted to retreat into the safety of denial. Dr. Chen entered the room, her surgical mask in place. "How are we doing?" she asked, checking the monitors. "Blood pressure's still higher than I'd like, but stable." Lila's breath hitched. "Something feels different," she gasped. The doctor performed a quick examination. "You're fully dilated. It's time to push, Lila." Fear flickered across Lila's face. Ethan felt it mirror in his own chest, expanding until it threatened to overwhelm him. This was real. This was happening. Their baby, his baby, was coming. "Remember what we discussed," Dr. Chen continued, her voice calm and steady. "Push with each contraction. Mr. Parker, support her back when she leans forward." Ethan moved automatically, helping Lila sit up slightly. His free hand found the small of her back, and she leaned into his support. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw all the unspoken words between them. Her fear, her hope, her love, and underneath it all, her silent plea for forgiveness. The next contraction came stronger than before. Lila bore down, her face contorting with effort. Ethan found himself counting with the nurse, encouraging Lila through each push, despite the tornado of emotions whirling inside him. "That's it, doctor," Chen praised. "I can see the head. Take a breath and push again with the next contraction." Lila fell back against the pillows, her chest heaving. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm so tired." "Yes, you can," Ethan heard himself say, surprising them both. He squeezed her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Lila. You can do this." She looked at him, tears mixing with sweat on her cheeks. Then another contraction began, and she pushed with renewed determination. Time seemed to blur, marked only by the rhythm of contractions and pushing. Ethan's world narrowed to Lila's hand in his, her labored breathing, and the encouraging words of the medical team. "One more big push," Dr. Chen called out. "The baby's almost here." Lila gathered her remaining strength, crushing Ethan's hand as she pushed. Suddenly, a new sound filled the room, a high-pitched cry that cut through everything else. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced, lifting the tiny, wriggling form. Ethan stared, frozen in place, as the nurses quickly cleaned and wrapped the baby. His son. The word felt foreign in his mind. The baby's cries grew stronger, more insistent, as if demanding acknowledgement of his presence in the world. A nurse approached with the bundled infant, and Ethan found himself taking an involuntary step back. The baby looked so small, so fragile in her arms. His mind couldn't quite process that this tiny being was his child, the one he'd doubted, the one he'd almost rejected. He stood there in a daze, watching as the nurse carried his son closer, unable to move, unable to think, unable to feel anything beyond a profound sense of unreality. The nurse approached Ethan with the bundled infant, her experienced hands cradling the precious cargo. "Would you like to hold your son, Mr. Parker?" Her voice was gentle, understanding the weight of the moment. Ethan's throat went dry. His arms felt wooden as he extended them, following the nurse's quiet instructions on how to support the baby's head. The bundle seemed impossibly light, yet somehow the heaviest thing he'd ever held. The baby squirmed slightly as he settled into Ethan's arms. His tiny face was still red and wrinkled from birth, eyes squeezed shut against the bright hospital lights. A shock of dark hair peeked out from beneath the striped hospital cap. "He's 7 pounds, 3 ounces, the nurse said softly. "Perfect size for being a few weeks early." Ethan couldn't respond. His heart hammered against his ribs as he stared down at the infant. The baby's fingers were so small, they looked almost translucent, curled into tiny fists against the blanket. Something stirred in Ethan's chest, an unfamiliar warmth that spread through him despite his best efforts to remain detached. From the bed, Lila watched them with tired eyes. "He looks just like you," she whispered. The comment sent a jolt through Ethan's system. He studied the baby's features more intently, searching for himself in the miniature face. The nose might be his, he thought, and perhaps the shape of the chin. But doubt lingered at the edges of his mind, whispering its poisonous uncertainty. The baby's eyes fluttered open, revealing dark blue irises that seemed to look straight through him. Ethan felt his breath catch. Those eyes held such innocence, such pure trust. The tiny being in his arms had no concept of the turmoil in Ethan's mind, no awareness of the questions that plagued him. A small hand escaped the blanket, reaching upward. Without thinking, Ethan offered his finger, and the baby grasped it with surprising strength. The simple gesture sent waves of emotion crashing through him. Love, fear, hope, doubt, all tangled together in an overwhelming mess. "You're a natural," the nurse commented, adjusting a monitor nearby. Natural. The word echoed in Ethan's head. Nothing about this felt natural. He should be overjoyed, celebrating the miracle of his son's birth. Instead, he stood frozen between connection and doubt, wanting desperately to embrace this moment fully, but held back by his own uncertainties. The baby made a soft, cooing sound, drawing Ethan's attention back to the present. Those tiny fingers still gripped his, creating a physical link between them. Ethan found himself swaying slightly, an instinctive movement to soothe the infant. "Does he need anything?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "Is he hungry?" "We'll try feeding soon," the nurse assured him. "Right now he just needs to be held. Skin-to-skin contact is very important in these first hours." Ethan nodded, adjusting his hold to bring the baby closer to his chest. The newborn's warmth seeped through the hospital blanket, creating a spot of heat against his heart. It felt right, having this little person nestled against him, yet the nagging voice of doubt persisted. Would he ever be able to look at his son without questioning? Would there always be this shadow hanging over their relationship? The experimental fertility treatment Lila had pursued in secret still felt like a betrayal, tainting what should have been a pure moment of joy. The baby squirmed again, his face scrunching up before relaxing. Ethan found himself memorizing every detail: the curve of his ears, the slope of his nose, the way his eyebrows furrowed slightly in sleep. He wanted to find himself in these features, wanted absolute certainty that this was his child. But as he stood there, cradling his son, Ethan realized that certainty might not come immediately. The connection he felt was real, undeniable, yet fragile, like the tiny hand still wrapped around his finger. It would take time to strengthen, to grow, to overcome the doubts that threatened to overshadow this moment. The rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors filled the quiet room as Ethan sat in the padded chair, carefully rocking the newborn. Lila's soft breathing from the nearby bed provided a gentle counterpoint to the mechanical sounds. Her face, peaceful in sleep, still showed traces of exhaustion from the difficult delivery. Ethan studied his sleeping wife, remembering how she'd fought through the labor, her strength both humbling and terrifying. Now, in the dim light of the hospital room, everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's life unfold. The baby stirred in his arms, making tiny sounds that weren't quite cries. Ethan adjusted his hold, trying to remember everything the nurses had shown him about proper support. The weight of the infant felt foreign, yet somehow familiar, like a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing. "Shh," he whispered, the sound barely audible. His body moved instinctively, a gentle back and forth motion that seemed to soothe the baby. The simple act of rocking brought an unexpected peace, letting his thoughts drift in the quiet moment. Hours ago, he'd been lost in a storm of doubt and anger. Now, in the stillness of the hospital room, those emotions felt distant, not gone, but muted. The baby's warmth against his chest created a bubble of calm that made his earlier reactions seem harsh, almost alien. A nurse poked her head in, checking on them. She smiled at the sight of Ethan rocking the baby, gave him a thumbs up, and quietly withdrew. The brief interruption made the baby squirm, tiny arms working free of the hospital blanket. Ethan watched, fascinated, as those miniature fingers flexed and stretched. He'd never paid much attention to babies before, had actively avoided thinking about them during the years of failed fertility treatments. Now, he couldn't look away from the delicate movements, the perfectly formed fingernails, the soft creases in those tiny palms. The baby's right hand opened fully, reaching upward in an unconscious stretch. Ethan caught the small hand with his finger, marveling at how it barely spanned the width of his knuckle. As he did, something caught his eye, a small, distinctive mark on the baby's palm. His heart skipped a beat. Carefully, trying not to disturb the baby, Ethan shifted to get a better look. There, in the center of the tiny palm, was a mark he knew intimately, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark, identical to the one he'd carried his entire life. Time seemed to stop. The hospital room faded away as Ethan stared at that tiny hand, at the undeniable proof before him. His own birthmark, unique and distinctive, mirrored perfectly in miniature on his son's palm. His son. The truth of it hit him like a physical force, stealing his breath. This wasn't just any baby. This was his child, his flesh and blood, carrying a mark that had been passed down through his family for generations. All the doubt, all the anger and confusion of the past months crashed against this simple, irrefutable fact. Ethan's vision blurred as he looked at the sleeping infant's face, truly seeing him for the first time. His chest felt too tight, too full of emotions he couldn't begin to name. The baby's hand was still wrapped around his finger, that small birthmark pressed against his skin like a seal of truth. In that moment, everything changed. The weight in his arms wasn't just a baby anymore. It was his son, his future, his legacy made flesh. Every tiny feature took on new meaning, new importance. The dark hair, the slope of the nose, the set of the chin, all of it suddenly familiar, all of it precious beyond words. His heart pounded as the magnitude of this revelation washed over him. All his doubts, his anger at Lila's secret treatment, his fear of betrayal, none of it mattered in the face of this undeniable connection. This was his child, his son, the miracle he'd stopped believing in. The quiet beeping of hospital monitors filled the room as Lila's eyes fluttered open. The harsh fluorescent lights made her squint, but her gaze quickly found Ethan sitting in the corner chair, cradling their newborn son. His expression caught her attention, a mix of wonder and disbelief that she hadn't seen before. "Ethan?" Her voice was hoarse from the hours of labor. He looked up, startled from his reverie. His eyes were red-rimmed, and something about his demeanor had shifted. The rigid tension that had defined him these past months seemed softer somehow, though not entirely gone. "Hey," he whispered, careful not to disturb the sleeping infant. "How are you feeling?" Lila tried to push herself up in the bed, wincing at the movement. "Sore. Tired." She paused, studying his face. "You look different." Ethan swallowed hard, glancing down at the baby. I found something." His voice cracked slightly. "His hand. There's a birthmark. The same as mine." Understanding dawned on Lila's face. She'd noticed the mark during the brief moment she'd held their son before exhaustion had claimed her. "The crescent shape?" He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The shame of his previous accusations hung heavy in the air between them. "I should have never doubted. I mean, I knew deep down, but you were hurt," Lila finished softly, "because I didn't tell you about the treatment." Ethan's shoulders slumped. The baby stirred in his arms, making small, snuffling sounds. He automatically adjusted his hold, the gesture already becoming natural. "I was wrong, Lila. So wrong. Not just about the baby, but about everything." Lila watched as he tenderly tucked the blanket around their son, noting how his hands trembled slightly. The sight brought tears to her eyes. This was the man she'd married, the one who'd been buried beneath layers of hurt and disappointment over years of failed treatments. "I kept the treatment secret because I couldn't bear to see that look in your eyes again," she admitted. "The one you'd get every time we failed, like each negative test was taking a piece of you away. And instead, I gave you that same look when you told me about the pregnancy." Ethan's voice was thick with regret. "I made you carry this joy alone, turned it into something shameful." The baby's tiny hand escaped the blanket again, reaching up to grasp Ethan's finger. The matching birthmarks pressed together, and Ethan's breath caught. "He's perfect, Lila. He's ours. And I nearly—" "But you didn't," Lila interrupted gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." Ethan finally looked up, meeting her gaze. His eyes were wet with unshed tears. "How can you forgive me so easily? I accused you of— I let my fears poison everything." "Because I know you," Lila said simply. "And I know this is our son. I never doubted that for a moment." The certainty in her voice made Ethan's chest tight. He stood carefully, moving to sit on the edge of her bed. With infinite gentleness, he transferred the baby into her arms, watching as she cradled their son close. "I was so scared," he confessed quietly. "Not just of being betrayed, but of hoping again. Every time we failed before, it felt like I was failing you. When you told me about the pregnancy, about the secret treatment, I couldn't handle the idea that you'd found a way without me, that I wasn't part of the miracle." Lila reached out with her free hand, touching his cheek. "You are part of this miracle. Look at him, Ethan. He's proof of that." The baby opened his eyes then, unfocused, but somehow seeming to look right at Ethan. The same deep blue as his own eyes stared back at him, and something inside his chest cracked wide open. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words inadequate for the depth of his regret. "I should have trusted you, should have supported you, should have—" "Shh," Lila soothed, her smile gentle despite her exhaustion. "He's here now. He's yours, ours. That's all that matters." The fluorescent lights of the hospital cafeteria cast harsh shadows across Ethan's face as he pushed a plastic fork through his untouched salad. His hands trembled, making the utensil rattle against the cheap plate. The few other people scattered around the room, nurses grabbing quick bites between shifts, worried family members seeking refuge, seemed distant, like figures in a fog. He lifted his coffee cup, but the liquid inside rippled from his unsteady grip. Setting it back down, he pressed his palms flat against the cold table surface, trying to steady himself. The events of the past few hours played on repeat in his mind. The birthmark on his son's tiny hand, the unmistakable proof he'd been too blind to see coming, the weight of his accusations hanging heavy in the air. A young couple walked past his table, the woman's pregnant belly prominent. They were laughing about something, sharing a private joke. The sight made Ethan's stomach clench. How many moments like that had he stolen from Lila? How many chances to share in the joy of their pregnancy had he destroyed with his suspicion and anger? The memory of her face when he'd first questioned the pregnancy's validity rose unbidden. The way her smile had crumbled, how the light in her eyes had dimmed. He'd been so caught up in his own fears and doubts that he'd missed the most important thing, the miracle they'd both wanted for so long. "Sir?" A cafeteria worker's voice startled him. "We're closing this section for cleaning." Ethan nodded, gathering his barely touched meal. He dumped it in the trash, his appetite long gone. As he walked the sterile hallways back toward Lila's room, his mind drifted to all the nights he'd spent at the office, avoiding home, avoiding her. He'd told himself he was protecting his heart, preventing more disappointment. Instead, he'd only caused more pain. The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor number lit up slowly, giving him too much time to remember every harsh word, every accusatory glance, every moment he'd chosen doubt over trust. The weight of his behavior pressed down on him like a physical thing. When he reached Lila's floor, he paused at the nurses' station, watching them go about their duties. They moved with purpose, with certainty. He envied their confidence, their clear sense of direction. His own path forward seemed murky, complicated by months of mistrust and hurt. Outside Lila's room, he took a deep breath, straightening his wrinkled shirt. Through the small window in the door, he could see her. She was awake, gazing down at their son in the hospital bassinet beside her bed. The tender expression on her face made his chest ache. Ethan pushed the door open quietly, but Lila's head still snapped up at the sound. The warmth in her expression cooled slightly, replaced by something more guarded. It was a look he'd grown familiar with over the past months, but now it cut deeper than ever. "I thought you might be hungry," he said softly, approaching the bed. "I brought you some juice from the cafeteria." He held out the small bottle like a peace offering. Lila accepted it without meeting his eyes. "Thank you." The silence stretched between them, filled only by their son's soft breathing. Ethan moved closer, his throat tight with unsaid words. "Lila, I need to tell you how sorry I am," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "The way I acted, the things I said." She looked up then, and the pain in her eyes stopped him cold. Exhaustion lined her face, but it was more than physical tiredness. It was the weariness of someone who'd carried too heavy a burden alone for too long. "I don't know if I can do this right now, Ethan," she said quietly. Her hands fidgeted with the hospital blanket. "I'm tired. So tired. And not just from giving birth." The weight of everything she wasn't saying hung in the air between them. Her face showed the strain of months of emotional distance, of defending herself against his suspicions, of celebrating their miracle alone while he withdrew further into his doubts. "I understand," he whispered, though the words felt inadequate. He could see in her expression that the damage he'd done wouldn't be erased with a single apology, no matter how sincere. The hospital room settled into the quiet rhythm of night. The soft beeping of monitors and distant footsteps of nurses made a gentle symphony that did nothing to ease Ethan's racing thoughts. He sat in the stiff hospital chair, watching Lila's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, while their son rested quietly in the bassinet beside her. The fluorescent lights in the hallway cast long shadows across the floor. Ethan's eyes burned with exhaustion, but sleep felt impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lila's face when he'd first questioned the pregnancy, the hurt in her expression when he'd stormed out after learning about the treatment. A nurse came in to check vitals, her movements practiced and quiet. She offered Ethan a sympathetic smile, probably assuming he was just another nervous new father. If only it were that simple. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him like a physical presence. He stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and walked to the window. The city sprawled out below, a constellation of lights twinkling in the darkness. How many nights had he spent at the office, buried in work, using success as a shield against the pain of their failed attempts at having a child? While he'd been hiding behind spreadsheets and meetings, Lila had been carrying this burden alone. Their son made a small sound in his sleep, drawing Ethan's attention. He moved to the bassinet, studying the tiny features that somehow managed to look both foreign and familiar. The birthmark on his palm, identical to Ethan's own, was hidden beneath tightly curled fingers, a mark of undeniable connection that made his previous doubts seem not just unfair, but cruel. "You're still awake?" Lila's voice, soft and heavy with sleep, startled him. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, turning to face her. The dim light softened her features but couldn't hide the wariness in her eyes. She shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "The baby?" "He's perfect," Ethan assured her. "Sleeping soundly." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Lila's hands twisted in the hospital blanket, a nervous gesture he recognized from their early dating days. The sight made his chest ache with longing for simpler times. "I keep thinking about everything," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "About how I reacted when you told me about the pregnancy, about all the times I should have been there for you, should have listened." Lila's eyes glistened in the dim light. "I wanted to tell you about the treatment," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Every day I wanted to share it with you, but I was so scared, Ethan." He moved closer to her bed, his heart pounding. "Scared of what?" "Of you rejecting it, of you refusing to try again." She took a shaky breath. "Of watching you pull away even further if it failed. We'd already been through so much disappointment, and each time you became more distant. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you completely." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He remembered how he'd withdrawn after each failed attempt, how he'd buried himself in work, convincing himself he was protecting them both from more pain. Instead, he'd left her to face their struggles alone. "I thought," Lila continued, her voice breaking slightly, "I thought if it worked, if I could just give you this one miracle, everything would be okay. And if it failed, you'd never have to know. I could carry that disappointment alone." Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and Ethan felt his own eyes burning. The depth of her sacrifice, the weight of the burden she'd chosen to bear alone, all to protect their marriage, to protect him. It was overwhelming. "I love you," she whispered, looking at him with eyes full of both love and hurt. "I've always loved you, even when you doubted me, even when you pulled away. I just wanted us to have the family we'd dreamed of." Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital room's Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the sterile floor. Ethan sat in the chair beside Lila's bed, both of them watching their son sleep peacefully in the bassinet. The gentle beeping of monitors created a steady rhythm in the background, almost like a metronome counting the moments of silence between them. Lila adjusted herself in the bed, still sore from the delivery. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and despite her exhaustion, her eyes held a clarity that made Ethan's heart ache. She'd always been the stronger one, he realized, even when he'd convinced himself otherwise. "I've been thinking about everything," Ethan began, his voice quiet but steady. "About how we got here, about all the things I should have done differently." Lila's fingers played with the edge of her blanket, a nervous habit he'd noticed years ago when they first started dating. "We both made mistakes," she said softly. "No," Ethan shook his head, leaning forward in his chair. "My mistakes were different. I shut down when things got hard. I buried myself in work instead of facing our problems together. I left you alone when you needed me most." The morning nurse had left a tray of breakfast on the rolling table, but neither of them touched it. Their son made a small sound in his sleep, and both parents instinctively looked toward the bassinet before continuing their conversation. "Every failed attempt," Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I convinced myself I was protecting us both by pulling away, but I was really just protecting myself. I couldn't bear to see the hope in your eyes fade away each time, so I stopped looking altogether." Lila's eyes welled with tears. "I needed you to look, Ethan. I needed you to see me, to see us, even when things were hard, especially then." "I know that now." He reached for her hand, relief washing over him when she didn't pull away. "When you told me about the pregnancy, I let my fears and insecurities override everything else. Instead of celebrating with you, I questioned you. Instead of supporting you, I doubted you." "You hurt me," Lila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just with the pregnancy, but all the times before. Each time you pulled away, each time you stayed late at the office instead of coming home, each time you changed the subject when I tried to talk about having a family." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Ethan felt the familiar urge to defend himself, to explain his actions, but he pushed it down. This wasn't about justification anymore. "I want to be better," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "I want to be the husband you deserve, the father our son needs. I promise you, Lila, I will never let my doubts cloud my love for you again." Lila looked at him, her eyes searching his face. He could see the war within her, the desire to believe him fighting against the memory of past hurts. "I want to believe that," she said finally. "But trust isn't just about words, Ethan. It's about actions, about being there consistently, about choosing us even when it's hard." She glanced at their sleeping son, her expression softening. "I look at him, and I see everything we've fought for, everything we've dreamed about. But I also remember how close we came to losing it all because of fear and doubt." Ethan felt the weight of her words, understanding that his promises, no matter how sincere, couldn't immediately erase the pain he'd caused. He saw the caution in her eyes, the careful way she held herself back from fully embracing his words. "I know it will take time," he acknowledged, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I know I have to earn your trust back. But I'm here, Lila. I'm not running anymore." She nodded slowly, but he could see the reservation in her eyes, the careful guard she'd built around her heart. The path to rebuilding their trust would be long, and there were no guarantees. But as their son slept peacefully beside them, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that it was a path worth taking. The hospital garden was quiet in the early afternoon sun. Ethan walked slowly along the winding path, his expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. Around him, carefully tended flowers bloomed in brilliant colors, but he barely noticed them. His mind was too full of the conversations from earlier, of Lila's guarded expression and the weight of everything that still lay unspoken between them. He stopped at a wooden bench, sinking down onto it with a heavy sigh. The events of the past few months played through his mind like a movie he couldn't stop. Lila's announcement, his immediate disbelief, the hurt in her eyes when he'd questioned her. He ran his hands through his hair, disheveled from countless worried gestures. "What kind of man doubts his wife like that?" he muttered to himself, watching a butterfly land on a nearby flower. The simple beauty of the moment struck him, how life continued, grew, and flourished even when everything felt broken. The sound of children laughing drew his attention to a nearby playground, where parents watched their little ones climb and slide. He thought about his son, barely a day old, and how close he'd come to letting his fears destroy what should have been the happiest moment of their lives. A young father caught his eye, patiently helping his toddler daughter up the steps to a slide. The man's face showed nothing but pure joy and pride. Ethan felt a pang of envy, wondering if he'd ever be able to be that kind of father, present, patient, unguarded with his love. "I don't even know how to do this," he admitted quietly to himself. His own father had been distant, more concerned with business success than family connections. It was a pattern Ethan had unconsciously followed, building walls around his heart, measuring his worth in contracts and profit margins instead of moments of connection. The breeze carried the sweet scent of jasmine, reminding him of Lila's garden at home. She'd planted it herself, nurturing it with the same patience and care she'd shown their marriage, even when he'd been too blind to see it. While he'd been focusing on building his empire, she'd been trying to build their family. Standing up, Ethan walked to a small fountain in the center of the garden. The sound of running water had always helped him think clearly. He watched the sunlight play on the rippling surface, remembering the day he'd first met Lila. She'd been so full of life, so open with her emotions. When had he started seeing that openness as a weakness instead of the strength it truly was? His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from his assistant about an urgent business matter. For the first time in his career, Ethan ignored it completely. Some things were more important than business deals and bottom lines. He'd lost sight of that somewhere along the way, but his son's birth had shifted everything into sharp focus. Making his way back toward the hospital building, Ethan felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because he finally understood what he needed to do. Heavier because he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Years of emotional distance and broken trust couldn't be fixed with a single conversation or moment of clarity. When he reached Lila's room, she was sitting up in bed, cradling their son. The sight stopped him in the doorway. They looked so perfect together. So right. Lila looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. He saw the lingering hurt there, but also something else, a flicker of hope, perhaps. "Ethan?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. Would you hold my hand? Stay with us for a while?" The vulnerability in her request made his throat tight. This was Lila reaching out, offering him a chance he wasn't sure he deserved. He crossed the room without hesitation, settling into the chair beside her bed. When he took her hand, her fingers trembled slightly before intertwining with his. "I'm here," he said quietly, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. "For both of you, for as long as you'll let me be." The front door swung open to reveal their elegant foyer, transformed into a garden of well-wishes. Bouquets of flowers in soft pastels and vibrant hues filled every surface, their sweet fragrance mixing with the familiar scent of home. Gift baskets wrapped in cellophane and tied with elaborate bows crowded the console table, spilling onto the floor. Ethan stepped in first, carrying the car seat with precious care. Baby Parker slept soundly, tiny fingers curled into fists, oblivious to the momentous occasion of his homecoming. Lila followed slowly, still tender from the delivery, one hand pressed against the wall for support. "Here, let me help you," Ethan said softly, setting down the car seat to offer his arm. The gesture felt both natural and strange. They were still finding their way back to each other, navigating this new territory of parenthood while healing old wounds. Lila accepted his help with a small smile, leaning into him slightly as they made their way to the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm patches of light across the hardwood floors. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it days ago, yet somehow different, as if the space itself knew it now needed to accommodate this new life they'd brought home. "Someone's been here," Lila observed, noticing the fresh flowers on the coffee table and the subtle hints of cleaning in the air. "Probably Sarah from next door. She said she'd help get things ready." Ethan nodded, remembering the neighbor's kind offer. He'd been too preoccupied with hospital paperwork and gathering their things to think about preparing the house. Now, he felt grateful for the thoughtfulness of others, filling in the gaps while they focused on what mattered most. A soft whimper drew their attention to the car seat. Baby Parker was stirring, his face scrunching up in that peculiar way newborns had. Lila moved to pick him up, but Ethan gestured for her to sit. "Let me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You need to rest." He bent down, carefully unbuckling the straps that seemed impossibly small in his hands. The baby's weight was still unfamiliar to him, so light, yet carrying the weight of all his hopes and fears. As he lifted his son, memories of the hospital flooded back. The first moment he'd held him, the discovery of the matching birthmark, the overwhelming rush of love that had shattered his walls of doubt. The baby settled against his chest, tiny breaths warm against his neck. Ethan stood there, swaying slightly, taking in every detail, the soft dark hair, the perfect little fingers, the way his son seemed to fit perfectly in his arms. In that moment, something shifted inside him, a final piece falling into place. Looking at Lila curled up on the sofa, watching them with tired eyes full of love, he felt the full impact of what he'd almost lost through his stubborn pride and fear. The quiet of their home wrapped around them like a blanket, not fragile as he'd feared, but full of possibility. Baby Parker made a small sound, somewhere between a sigh and a coo, and Ethan felt his heart expand. Here, in the familiar surroundings of their home, holding his son while his wife looked on, he made a silent vow. He would be present for every moment, big and small. He would never again let doubt poison what was precious. He would be the father his son deserved, the husband Lila had always believed he could be. In the peaceful quiet of their living room, surrounded by the tangible evidence of others' joy for their family, Ethan held his son close and let himself fully embrace this new chapter of their lives. The past few months had taught him that love wasn't about certainty. It was about faith, trust, and the courage to open your heart even when you're scared. The gentle hum of the baby monitor filled their bedroom as dawn crept through the windows. Ethan stirred first, his eyes opening to find Lila still peacefully asleep beside him. The past week had settled into a rhythm of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of rest. He slipped out of bed quietly, padding down the hallway to check on Baby Parker. The nursery was bathed in soft morning light, filtering through the cream-colored curtains. Their son lay awake in his crib, tiny fists waving at nothing in particular. Ethan smiled, reaching down to lift him. "Good morning, little man," he whispered, cradling Parker against his chest. The baby's warmth and weight had become familiar now, a comfort he looked forward to each day. The matching birthmarks on their palms pressed together as Ethan adjusted his hold, a reminder of their connection that still made his heart skip. In the kitchen, he managed to prepare a bottle one-handed, a skill he'd practiced diligently over the past days. The quiet moments like these, just him and Parker in the early morning light, had become precious. They helped ease the lingering tension between him and Lila, giving them both space to heal while sharing the joy of their son. Lila appeared in the doorway as he finished feeding Parker, her hair tousled from sleep. "You should have woken me," she said, but her voice held no reproach. "You needed the rest," Ethan replied, offering her a small smile. These exchanges, once awkward and strained, had grown easier with each passing day. He watched as she moved around the kitchen, starting the coffee maker, her movements still careful from the recovery. They worked together in comfortable silence, falling into their morning routine. Ethan burped Parker while Lila prepared breakfast, the simple domestic scene feeling both ordinary and extraordinary. When their hands brushed as she passed him a coffee mug, neither pulled away too quickly anymore. Throughout the day, they moved in orbit around each other and their son. Ethan had learned to read Lila's subtle cues, when she needed help, when she needed space, when she just needed him nearby. He'd watch her sing softly to Parker during afternoon feedings, her voice carrying through the baby monitor while he worked in his home office. During Parker's nap times, they began to talk more openly. Small conversations at first, about the baby's schedule, about household needs, about the countless cards and gifts that continued to arrive. But gradually, they ventured into deeper waters. "I missed this," Lila said one afternoon, as they folded tiny onesies together. "Just being able to talk to you without feeling like there was a wall between us." Ethan paused, a blue sleeper in his hands. "I'm sorry I helped build that wall," he replied softly. The admission came easier now, pride giving way to honesty. In the evening, they established new traditions. Ethan would take Parker for his last feeding before bedtime, giving Lila a chance to rest. He'd sit in the nursery's rocking chair, telling his son stories about his day while bottle feeding him. Sometimes Lila would lean against the doorframe, watching them with a soft expression that made his heart ache with gratitude. One such evening, as the sunset painted their living room in warm, golden hues, they sat together on the couch. Parker dozed in Ethan's arms, milk-drunk and content. The TV played quietly in the background, more ambient noise than entertainment. Lila turned to him, her eyes holding a warmth he'd missed during their darker days. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being here, for trying so hard." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan looked down at their sleeping son, then back at his wife. The distance they'd traveled from those first shocking moments of pregnancy to now felt immense. Yet here they were, rebuilding their relationship one diaper change, one late-night feeding, one honest conversation at a time. Ethan sat in his home office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and business reports. But his mind wandered far from work. Through the open door, he could hear Lila's gentle humming as she moved around the nursery. The sound twisted something in his chest, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered. He pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. The past weeks played through his mind like a movie he couldn't stop watching. The shock on Lila's face when he'd first questioned the pregnancy. The hurt in her eyes when he'd walked away. The silence that had stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and broken trust. The leather chair creaked as he leaned back, closing his eyes. How many times had he sat in this very spot, buried in work, while Lila carried the weight of their fertility struggles alone? The experimental treatment she'd chosen. He understood now why she'd kept it secret. He'd given her no choice, really. His own fears and doubts had built walls so high she couldn't see any other way through. Standing up, Ethan walked to the window overlooking their backyard. The garden Lila had planted last spring was in full bloom, a riot of colors against the green lawn. She'd told him once that gardening gave her hope, that watching things grow helped her believe in possibilities. He hadn't really understood then. Now, watching a butterfly land on one of her roses, he felt the full weight of what that hope must have cost her. The sound of Parker's cry drew his attention. He heard Lila's footsteps, her soft words of comfort. Their son's cries settled almost immediately at his mother's touch. Ethan's chest tightened. She was such a natural mother, while he had nearly rejected this miracle outright. Moving through the house, he found himself outside the nursery. Lila sat in the rocking chair, Parker nestled against her chest. The sight stopped him in his tracks. This was what he'd almost thrown away. His wife, his son, this precious family he'd never thought possible. "I can see you brooding from here," Lila said softly, not looking up from Parker's sleeping face. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his throat tight. "I keep thinking about everything I did wrong," he admitted. "How I hurt you. How I let my fears control me." Lila's rocking slowed, but didn't stop. "Come here," she said, patting the ottoman beside her chair. He moved closer, sitting down carefully to avoid disturbing Parker. Up close, he could see the tiny movements of their son's dreams, the perfect bow of his lips, so like Lila's. "I was so afraid," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just of being betrayed, but of hoping again. After all those failed treatments, all those disappointments, I couldn't bear the thought of another letdown. But instead of sharing that fear with you, I shut down. I left you to face everything alone." Lila reached out with her free hand, finding his. Their fingers intertwined, and Ethan felt the gentle pressure of her squeeze. "We both made mistakes," she said. "I should have trusted you enough to tell you about the treatment. But I was scared too. Scared of seeing that look in your eyes again, the one that said you'd given up." Ethan brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Lila agreed, making him look up in surprise. A small smile played at her lips. "But that's the thing about forgiveness. It's not about deserving it. It's about choosing to move forward together. About learning from our mistakes instead of being buried by them." Her words settled over him like a balm. Parker stirred slightly in her arms, making those tiny snuffling sounds that never failed to melt Ethan's heart. Looking at them both, he felt something shift inside him. Not an ending to his guilt, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. Sunlight streamed through the nursery windows, casting warm patterns across the plush carpet. Ethan sat in the rocking chair, cradling Parker against his chest. The baby's weight, so slight yet so significant, grounded him in the moment. Early morning was becoming their special time together, these quiet hours before the day truly began. Parker's tiny fingers curled around Ethan's thumb, the matching birthmarks on their palms aligned. The simple gesture still amazed him, this tangible proof of their connection that he'd once doubted so strongly. The baby's chest rose and fell in peaceful sleep, his face serene and trusting. "You're getting bigger every day, aren't you?" Ethan whispered, running a gentle finger along Parker's cheek. The baby had gained weight steadily since coming home, his cheeks filling out, his grip growing stronger. Each small change was a miracle Ethan couldn't help but document in his mind. The responsibility of fatherhood weighed heavily on him, not as a burden, but as a precious gift he was still learning to handle. He thought about all the moments ahead. First steps, first words, first day of school. Moments he'd almost denied himself through his own fear and stubbornness. Parker stirred, making those small snuffling sounds that Ethan had come to recognize as signs of hunger or discomfort. Without thinking, he adjusted his hold, patting the baby's back in the soothing rhythm he'd learned through trial and error. The fact that he knew these things now, that his body responded automatically to his son's needs, filled him with a quiet pride. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he confessed to the quiet room. "Your mom knew, though. She knew all along what a blessing you'd be." His voice caught slightly. "I'm sorry I took so long to catch up." The morning light strengthened, warming the room. Ethan stood carefully, moving to the window with Parker. The garden below was coming alive with early birds and butterflies, nature's daily reminder that life went on, grew, evolved, just like their little family. He heard soft footsteps in the hallway, Lila's familiar tread. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day, her face softening at the sight of them by the window. The smile she gave them held all the forgiveness and love he was still learning to accept. "Look who's awake," she said softly, crossing the room to join them. Her presence completed something in Ethan's chest. A circle of belonging he hadn't known was incomplete until Parker arrived. Ethan shifted slightly so she could see their son's face. Parker's eyes were open now, taking in the world with that peculiar intensity newborns had. "He's been watching the birds," Ethan said, though, truthfully, he wasn't sure what caught their son's attention most. Lila leaned against his arm, her warmth seeping through his shirt. Together they watched their son explore the world with his eyes, making those small movements that seemed so purposeful despite their randomness. The moment felt sacred somehow, wrapped in morning light and shared breath. Ethan turned his head slightly, pressing a kiss to Parker's forehead. "I promise you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always be here for you no matter what. You'll never have to doubt that, not ever." Lila's hand found his arm, squeezing gently. She didn't speak, but he felt her support, her understanding of the weight behind his words. The promise wasn't just to Parker, but to both of them. A vow to be present, to be worthy of the trust they placed in him. Parker made a soft, cooing sound, his tiny hand reaching up toward Ethan's face. In that gesture, Ethan saw all the possibilities ahead of them, all the moments of joy, discovery, and growth they would share as a family. The responsibility of it all still humbled him, but now it filled him with determination rather than fear. The living room was bathed in soft lamplight as evening settled over their home. Parker was finally asleep upstairs, his gentle breaths monitored by the baby monitor on the coffee table. Ethan and Lila sat on opposite ends of their plush sofa, the distance between them feeling both necessary and painful. Lila wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, her wedding ring catching the light. Ethan watched her, noting how she seemed to use the mug as a shield, something to hold on to while they navigated this delicate conversation. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice soft but clear in the quiet room. "About everything that happened, about how I reacted when you told me about the pregnancy." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wrong, Lila. So terribly wrong." Lila's fingers tightened around her mug. "I wasn't completely right either," she admitted. "Keeping the treatment from you, I should have told you. But I was so scared, Ethan. Every failed attempt before had pushed us further apart, and I couldn't bear to see that happening again." "No." Ethan shook his head, shifting closer to her on the sofa. "You were trying to protect our marriage, our future. I see that now. I was the one who shut down after each disappointment, who made you feel like you couldn't come to me with your hopes and fears." The baby monitor crackled with Parker's soft coos before settling back into quiet. Both parents glanced at it instinctively, their shared concern for their son creating a moment of connection. Do you know what hurts the most? Lila set her mug down, finally meeting Ethan's eyes. It wasn't just that you doubted the pregnancy. You doubted me, Ethan. After all our years together, you actually thought I could— Her voice cracked, unable to finish the sentence. Ethan felt the weight of shame press against his chest. I let my fears control me, he admitted. Every time we tried and failed to have a baby, I built these walls. I convinced myself that if I didn't hope, it wouldn't hurt so much. But all I did was hurt you instead. We both built walls, Lila said softly. I stopped telling you about my appointments, stopped sharing how much I still wanted a family. I thought if I kept it all inside, you wouldn't have to deal with my disappointment too. Ethan moved closer, cautiously reaching for her hand. When she didn't pull away, he entwined their fingers together. I want to be better, Lila. For you, for Parker, for us. I want to be the kind of husband you can trust with your hopes and fears. I want that too. Lila squeezed his hand. But trust isn't just about words, Ethan. It's about actions, about being there even when things get hard. I know, he nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. And I'm going to prove it to you every day. When I saw that birthmark on Parker's hand, matching mine exactly, it wasn't just about knowing he was my son. It was about realizing how blind I'd been, how I'd let my own insecurities cloud what should have been the happiest moment of our lives. Tears welled in Lila's eyes. I've missed you, Ethan. Even when you were right here, I've missed the connection we used to have. I'm here now. Ethan's voice was thick with emotion. Really here. And I swear to you, Lila, I will never doubt you again. Never doubt us. The walls come down, starting now. Lila searched his face, looking for any trace of hesitation or uncertainty. Finding none, she leaned forward, closing the remaining distance between them. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she buried her face in his chest. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's embrace, the soft sounds of their son's breathing through the monitor, a gentle reminder of everything they had to be grateful for. The future stretched ahead of them, not perfect perhaps, but full of possibility and hope. The autumn morning greeted them with gentle sunshine and a crisp breeze. Ethan adjusted the straps of the baby carrier, while Lila fussed with Parker's tiny hat, making sure his ears were protected from the cool air. Are you sure he's warm enough? Ethan asked, peering down at their son's peaceful face. He's perfect, Lila smiled, tucking a small blanket around Parker's legs. The doctor said fresh air would be good for him, and it's such a beautiful day. They stepped out onto their tree-lined street, walking close together. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet, creating a rhythm that seemed to match their steady pace. Parker's eyes were wide open, taking in the new sights and sounds around him. Look at him, Ethan said softly, watching their son's expression change with each new sensation. He's so alert. Lila reached out and stroked Parker's cheek. He gets that from you, you know, that curiosity about everything. The comment made Ethan's heart swell. These little connections, these tiny similarities between him and his son still filled him with wonder. Each one was a reminder of how wrong his doubts had been, how much he'd almost lost through his fear and suspicion. They walked slowly toward the nearby park, pointing out different things to Parker. The rustle of leaves in the trees, a squirrel darting across their path, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Each new experience seemed momentous, viewed through the lens of their son's first encounter with the world. I never knew it could be like this, Ethan admitted, his voice quiet. Everything feels different now, more important somehow. Lila squeezed his arm gently. That's what becoming parents does. It changes your whole perspective. They passed Mrs. Thompson's garden, where late-blooming roses still clung to their stems. The elderly woman was outside tending to her flowers and waved enthusiastically when she saw them. "Oh, is this the little one?" she called out, hurrying to her gate. "My goodness, he's beautiful!" Ethan and Lila paused, allowing their longtime neighbor to coo over Parker. The baby rewarded her attention with a tiny smile, causing all three adults to laugh in delight. "He's got your eyes, Ethan," Mrs. Thompson declared, but Lila's smile, definitely. The simple observation touched them both deeply. It was these everyday moments, these casual confirmations of their family unit, that helped heal the wounds of their recent past. As they continued their walk, they reached the small park that had been their destination. The space was quiet at this hour, just a few other early morning visitors enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. They found a comfortable bench near a flowering dogwood tree, its remaining leaves creating dappled shadows on the ground. Ethan carefully shifted Parker in the carrier, making sure he could see the world around him. The baby's hands reached out, grasping at sunbeams and shadows, each movement filled with wonder and discovery. "He's already trying to catch the light," Lila observed, watching their son's fascination with the play of sunshine through the leaves. "Just wait until he discovers he can chase the shadows," Ethan smiled, remembering his own childhood games. They sat together, sharing this peaceful moment, watching their son experience his first taste of nature. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of autumn. Parker's tiny hands continued their exploration, reaching for leaves that danced just out of his grasp. The simple joy of watching their son discover the world around him filled both parents with a profound sense of peace. The struggles they'd faced, the doubts and fears that had threatened to tear them apart, seemed to fade in the face of this perfect moment. Lila leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Their son, secure between them, continued his fascinated exploration of his new world, unaware of how his very presence had transformed theirs. The morning light filtered through the trees, warming them as they sat together, a family united by love and strengthened by the storms they'd weathered. Parker's tiny hands reached out again, grasping at a falling leaf, his face lighting up with delight at this new discovery. Sunlight streamed through the nursery windows as Ethan gently rocked Parker in the early morning hours. The familiar weight of his son in his arms had become a comfort he looked forward to each day. The steady rhythm of the rocking chair and Parker's soft breathing created a peaceful melody that made the outside world fade away. Work emails buzzed on his phone, but for the first time in his life, Ethan let them wait. His assistant knew to handle the urgent matters, and everything else could wait until after these precious morning moments with his son. "There's my two favorite men," Lila said softly from the doorway, her hair still slightly messy from sleep. She padded into the room in her slippers, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Ethan smiled up at her. "I thought I'd let you sleep in a bit. Parker and I were having some father-son time." She set the mugs down on the side table and perched on the window seat, watching them with tender eyes. "You've changed so much," she observed, not unkindly. "For the better, I hope," Ethan replied, adjusting Parker's blanket. "Definitely for the better." Lila reached out to stroke Parker's cheek. "Remember when you used to be out the door before sunrise?" Ethan nodded, feeling a twinge of regret for all the mornings he'd missed. "The office isn't going anywhere. But these moments?" He looked down at Parker's peaceful face. "These are the ones I can't get back." Lila picked up her coffee, wrapping both hands around the warm mug. "I never thought I'd see the day when Ethan Parker chose family over work." "Neither did I," he admitted, "but now I can't imagine it any other way." They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the peaceful morning. Outside, Birds chirped their morning songs, and the neighborhood slowly came to life. Parker stirred slightly, his tiny hand gripping Ethan's finger. "I've been thinking," Lila said after a while, "about our future." Ethan looked up, noting the thoughtful expression on her face. "What about it?" "About our family," she continued, setting her mug down. "About how different things are now. How we're different." Ethan nodded, encouraging her to continue. These conversations had become easier between them, the walls of doubt and mistrust slowly crumbling away. "I know we've been through so much," Lila said, moving to kneel beside the rocking chair. "The fertility treatments, the secrets, the doubt." She paused, reaching out to touch Parker's tiny foot. "But look what we got through it all." "Our miracle," Ethan agreed softly. "And maybe—" Lila took a deep breath, meeting his eyes. "Maybe when the time is right, we could try for another miracle? Together this time, no secrets." Ethan's heart swelled with emotion. The fact that Lila was ready to trust him again, to dream of expanding their family together, spoke volumes about how far they'd come. The man he'd been months ago would have balked at the idea, would have put up walls of practicality and doubt. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true value of family, of trust, of love. "Together," he agreed, reaching for her hand. "Everything together from now on." Lila's eyes filled with happy tears as she squeezed his hand. "No more experimental treatments without telling you," she promised with a small laugh. "And no more doubting you," he countered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're a team." Parker chose that moment to wake up fully, his bright eyes opening to look up at both his parents. His tiny face broke into a smile that melted both their hearts. "I think someone agrees," Lila said, leaning in to kiss Parker's forehead. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the Parker family estate's manicured lawn. Cheerful chatter and laughter filled the air as relatives gathered for the annual summer barbecue. Ethan stood near the stone patio, carefully cradling baby Parker in his arms, while Lila charmed their guests with her natural warmth. "He has your eyes, Ethan," his Aunt Margaret observed, cooing at the baby. "Such a blessing after everything." Ethan smiled, no longer feeling the sting that such comments used to bring. "We couldn't be more grateful," he replied, watching as Parker's tiny hand reached for a passing butterfly. Lila appeared at his side, slipping her arm through his. "The food's ready," she announced, her face glowing with happiness. "Should we find a quiet spot to feed this little one first?" Their easy synchronization as parents drew admiring glances from the family. Gone was the tension that had marked their earlier appearances at family gatherings. Instead, they moved together with the comfortable rhythm of two people who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger. "Here," Ethan's mother called, patting an empty spot at a shaded table. "I've saved you both seats." As they settled in, Lila expertly arranged Parker's blanket while Ethan prepared the bottle. Their teamwork had become second nature, each anticipating the other's needs without words. "Remember when you two first got married?" Ethan's cousin Sarah reminisced from across the table. "Ethan was always rushing off to some meeting or another." Lila laughed softly, adjusting Parker in her arms. "Those days feel like a lifetime ago." "They were," Ethan agreed, his hand finding Lila's shoulder. "I had different priorities then." The afternoon progressed with the easy flow of family togetherness. Parker became the center of attention, passed carefully from one adoring relative to another. Ethan watched as his son charmed everyone with his innocent smiles, just as Lila had always done. "He's going to be a heartbreaker," his mother declared, returning Parker to Lila's waiting arms, just like his father. Ethan caught Lila's knowing look and felt a warmth spread through his chest. The memory of his earlier doubts seemed distant now, washed away by the reality of their happiness. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, family members gathered for photos. Ethan stood with his arm around Lila's waist. Parker nestled between them, their faces bright with genuine joy. "One more," called the photographer, his cousin's husband. "This is a keeper." Lila leaned into Ethan's embrace, and he could feel the contentment radiating from her. Parker chose that moment to let out a happy gurgle, causing everyone to laugh. The sound of their combined laughter, the warmth of the setting sun, and the weight of his son in his arms created a perfect moment that Ethan knew he would remember forever. He looked at Lila, saw the happiness dancing in her eyes, and reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a gesture that had become as essential as breathing. In that touch was everything they had overcome: the doubt, the pain, the healing, and finally, the joy. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, feeling overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, to this moment of pure happiness surrounded by family and love. The late evening light painted everything in soft hues of gold and pink, and as Parker drifted off to sleep in Lila's arms, Ethan held her hand tighter, silently thanking whatever fate had given him this second chance at true happiness. The evening light filtered through the large windows of the Parkers' living room, casting warm shadows across the plush carpet where their son played. Scattered around him were colorful blocks and stuffed animals, his latest fascination being a soft blue elephant that Lila's mother had given them. The peaceful domestic scene was worlds away from the hospital room where their journey had begun. Ethan sat on the comfortable leather couch, his arm draped casually around Lila's shoulders as they watched their son attempting to stack blocks into wobbly towers. Each time the blocks tumbled, their little boy would giggle, the sound filling the room with pure joy. The sound of his laughter never failed to make Ethan's heart swell with love and gratitude. "He's getting better at that," Lila observed softly, leaning into Ethan's embrace. Her hair carried the faint scent of lavender, and Ethan found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. The tension that had once filled their home had dissolved, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from every corner. Their son looked up at them with bright eyes, proudly holding up a red block. "Look," he exclaimed, his face beaming with accomplishment. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Lila encouraged, her voice full of maternal pride. She shifted slightly, adjusting the throw pillow behind her back, and Ethan automatically moved to help her get comfortable. These small gestures of care had become second nature to them now. Where once there had been hesitation and doubt, there was now an easy flow of mutual understanding. Ethan watched as their son crawled over to them, block still clutched in his tiny hand, and remembered the first time he'd held him in the hospital. "Remember when he was so small?" Ethan mused, reaching down to ruffle their son's hair. "Now look at him, growing stronger every day." Lila nodded, her eyes soft with memory. "Just like us," she said quietly, placing her hand over Ethan's. The room was filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only comes with complete trust. Through the windows, they could see their garden, where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and pink, creating a peaceful tableau that matched their contentment. Their son had returned to his blocks, this time attempting to create what appeared to be a circular pattern on the floor. His face was scrunched in concentration, tongue sticking out slightly as he worked, an expression that mirrored Ethan's own when he was focused on something important. "He gets that from you," Lila teased, noticing the similarity. She squeezed Ethan's hand gently, a gesture that carried years of shared understanding. Ethan watched as their son carefully placed another block, his little hands steady and determined. The sight reminded him of how precarious everything had once seemed, how close he had come to losing this precious gift of family through his own doubts and fears. The room was bathed in the last rays of sunlight, creating a golden glow that seemed to embrace them all. Their son's toys cast long shadows on the carpet, and the peaceful atmosphere was punctuated only by the occasional sound of blocks clicking together and their son's happy mumbling to himself. Looking at his family now, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. The doubt that had once clouded his judgment seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an unshakable certainty in the rightness of their life together. He pulled Lila closer, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Ethan looked at Lila, a smile spreading across his face. "We've made it through." Lila nodded, and they both watched their son, knowing that their future was bright with love, trust, and hope.